Life has a way of fooling you into believing everything is perfect. For years, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Linda and I weren't just partners, we were a team. From the moment we met, we were inseparable. People would often comment on how well we complemented each other, how we seemed to have it all together. If there was a golden couple, it was us, or at least that's what everyone thought. We shared everything. Dreams of the future, inside jokes that no one else could understand, and the kind of bond that I thought was unbreakable. There wasn't a moment in my day that didn't revolve around her. Waking up to her sleepy smile, coming home to her infectious laugh. It was the kind of love people write about in books or show in movies. We built our world together, piece by piece. Even during the hard times, like when her sister tragically passed away in a car accident, I stood by her, holding her hand through the tears and sleepless nights. It was us against the world. No matter how heavy the burden, we carried it together. But then, things began to change. Slowly at first, so subtly that I could almost convince myself it wasn't happening. The warm, radiant smile that used to greet me at the door after work started to fade. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Work could be demanding, and grief has a way of sneaking back up on you when you least expect it. I began to notice the little things. Linda became distant, her laughter less frequent. The small, loving gestures that once defined our relationship started to feel like a memory. She no longer looked at me with the same light in her eyes. And when I asked if everything was okay, she always had a ready excuse: work deadlines, family stress, or just being tired. I didn't want to push her. I told myself it was a phase, that we'd get through it together. After all, every relationship has its ups and downs, right? So, I focused on giving her space, doing everything I could to make life easier for her. If she seemed withdrawn, I thought, maybe she just needed time to herself. Then came the day everything changed. It started like any other. Linda seemed quieter than usual, her energy low. She brushed it off, saying she felt a little under the weather. Just a bug, she assured me, though her pale complexion and heavy eyes told a different story. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. She was visibly weak, barely able to get out of bed. I insisted we go to the doctor, and despite her protests, I drove her to the clinic. As we sat in the waiting room, I held her hand, telling her everything would be fine. "It's probably just a cold," I said, more to comfort myself than her. The tests took longer than I expected. Linda seemed tense, avoiding my eyes. When the doctor finally returned, his expression was grim. He hesitated, looking between us as if unsure how to proceed. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice steady but low. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." My heart sank. The sterile smell of the clinic suddenly felt suffocating. He continued, explaining in clinical terms, but all I could hear was one word: HIV. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not possible. There must be a mistake." The doctor's face remained somber, but it was Linda's reaction that truly broke me. She didn't look shocked. She didn't demand a retest or question the diagnosis. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked away, her face a mix of shame and sorrow. It felt like the ground beneath me had given way. My chest tightened, my mind raced, and 1,000 questions flooded my thoughts. But one stood out above all. How could this happen to us? And just like that, my fairy tale life began to crumble. Couldn't believe it. I sat there, staring at Linda as her tears fell silently onto her lap. My mind raced, refusing to process the words that had just escaped her lips. She had known. For months, she had carried this secret, burying it deep within her, hiding it from me. And now, with the truth laid bare, I felt like the foundation of my entire life had been swept out from under me. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "I was scared, David. I thought I could handle it without telling you. I didn't want to lose you." Her words hit me like a series of small explosions, each one chipping away at whatever remnants of stability I had left. I wanted to scream, to yell, to demand why. How could she keep something like this from me? But no sound escaped my throat. I was paralyzed, consumed by the weight of her betrayal. It wasn't a mistake. David, she admitted, her voice cracking. It happened because I was unfaithful. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the chair to steady myself, but nothing could ground me in that moment. She hadn't just lied to me. She had destroyed the trust we'd built, the life we'd shared, and worse, her actions had consequences I could never have imagined. I tried to speak, but the words came out hollow, devoid of the rage and confusion swirling inside me. How could you do this to us? Linda reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away instinctively, the gesture burning like fire against my skin. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, her face etched with guilt. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I kept it to myself, maybe we could move past it. But we couldn't move past it. Not now. Not ever. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw a stranger. This wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman who had been my rock, my partner, my everything. This was someone who had betrayed me in the deepest way possible, and in doing so had stolen the future I thought we were building together. The memories came flooding back. I thought of the nights I had held her as she cried over her sister's death, promising her that we'd get through it together. I remembered the sacrifices I had made, the endless support I had given her, even when it felt like she was slipping away from me. And now, I realized that while I had been fighting to keep us together, she had been tearing us apart. I can't do this, I said, my voice barely audible. The weight of the situation was crushing me, suffocating me. David, please, she pleaded, her eyes desperate. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just don't leave me. But her tears couldn't undo what had been done. She had betrayed me, not just emotionally but physically. And the ultimate betrayal? She had put my health at risk. When the doctor confirmed that I, too, had contracted the virus, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. I need time, I said, unable to look at her. I can't even think right now. Without another word, I left. For the next 2 months, I lived in a haze of disbelief and despair. Every waking moment was consumed by questions I couldn't answer. How could the woman I had loved and trusted with my life do something so cruel? What had I done to deserve this? Was it my fault? I threw myself into work, hoping the routine would distract me. But nothing could drown out the echoes of our life together. The memories that once brought me comfort now felt like daggers, each one a painful reminder of what I had lost. Linda called me every day, sometimes leaving voicemails that I couldn't bear to listen to. She sent messages, emails, even handwritten letters, each one begging me to come back. She swore she would change, that she would spend the rest of her life making it up to me. But how could I believe her? How could I trust someone who had destroyed the very foundation of our relationship? And yet, amidst the anger and hurt, a part of me still loved her. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't turn off those feelings. I had spent years building a life with this woman, dreaming of a future together. Was it possible to let all of that go? After weeks of sleepless nights and endless inner turmoil, I made a decision. I would see her, not to forgive her, not yet, but to see if there was anything left to salvage. When I arrived at her apartment, she opened the door, her face pale and drawn. "David," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I stepped inside, the air between us thick with tension. She started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm here to talk," I said. "That's all." For hours, we sat across from each other, the silence punctuated by her apologies and my questions. Why? How? What now? She didn't have all the answers, but she promised me one thing. She would dedicate herself to earning back my trust, no matter how long it took. I didn't know if I believed her. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. But as I looked into her tear-streaked face, I realized I wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Linda," I said finally, my voice heavy with emotion, "this isn't going to be easy. I don't know if we can fix this, but I'll try." Her relief was palpable, but I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for us, for the hope, however fragile, that we might find a way back to the life we once had. After deciding to give our relationship another chance, I truly hoped it would be a new beginning. I wanted to believe that we could rebuild what had been broken, that with enough effort, we might rediscover the love and trust we once shared. For a brief moment, it even seemed possible. The first few weeks after our reconciliation were tense but promising. Linda appeared to be making an effort. She was more attentive, taking the time to check in with me throughout the day, cooking meals she knew I loved, and initiating heartfelt conversations about how we could move forward. On the surface, it seemed like she was trying to make amends. But even in her moments of sincerity, there was a shadow I couldn't ignore, a feeling, deep in my gut, that something was still off. I chalked it up to my lingering mistrust, a wound that time and effort might heal. Yet, support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference. As the days turned into weeks, that shadow only grew. Her behavior began to shift again. It started subtly, with small changes I almost didn't notice. She seemed more preoccupied, often staring at her phone for longer than usual. When I asked her what was wrong, she'd dismiss my concerns with a quick smile or a vague answer about work stress. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Linda hesitated before saying, "David, I think it's best if you don't pick me up from work anymore." Her words caught me off guard. "Why?" I asked, setting down my fork. "I just need some space," she said, avoiding my gaze. "It's nothing personal. I've been feeling suffocated lately, like I can't breathe. I need some time for myself after work, to clear my head." I wanted to believe her. Maybe she truly needed the time alone, especially after everything we'd been through. But part of me couldn't shake the feeling that her request wasn't just about needing space. It was about something or someone else. I tried to let it go, to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the doubts persisted. A few months later, my suspicions began to solidify into something I could no longer ignore. Linda had started spending more evenings out, claiming she was meeting colleagues or attending networking events. She assured me it was all professional, but her explanations felt rehearsed, her tone too casual, too dismissive. Then came the night of the party. I hadn't planned to go. I was tired from a long week and wasn't in the mood for socializing. But Linda insisted. "It'll be good for us," she said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. "A chance to have some fun together." Reluctantly, I agreed. The party was at a sleek downtown venue, filled with the kind of people who thrived on networking and superficial charm. I didn't know many of them, so I stuck close to Linda at first. But as the evening went on, she began to drift away, mingling effortlessly while I lingered by the bar. That's when I saw him. He was tall, with a polished demeanor and an air of confidence that immediately set my teeth on edge. Linda was with him, laughing at something he'd said, her hand lightly brushing his arm. I tried to dismiss it as nothing more than harmless conversation, but the way she looked at him, the sparkle in her eyes, the easy intimacy between them, made my chest tighten. As the night wore on, they grew closer. I watched as she allowed him to hold her by the waist, their movements synchronized as they danced. My heart sank. This wasn't just friendly banter or a casual encounter. This was something deeper, something that shouldn't have been happening. I couldn't take it anymore. Pushing through the crowd, I reached them on the dance floor. "Linda," I said, my voice strained but firm. "We're leaving. Now." She looked startled, then irritated. "David, you're overreacting," she said, her tone dismissive. But I wasn't having it. "This has gone far enough," I said, my patience snapping. Without waiting for her response, I took her by the arm and led her out of the party. At home, the argument erupted like a storm. "You're being ridiculous," Linda shouted, her face flushed with anger. "He's just a colleague. You're making something out of nothing." I stared at her, my own anger barely contained. "Don't lie to me, Linda. I saw the way you looked at him. I saw the way he touched you. Do you think I'm blind?" She crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "You're just jealous," she said. "You've always been so controlling, so paranoid. It's exhausting." Her words hit me like a slap. Controlling? Paranoid? After everything we've been through, you dare to say that to me? The room fell silent, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, as if to twist the knife deeper, she added, "Well, if you must know, I'm going out with him tomorrow. He asked me to dinner, and I said yes." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't flinch. "Yes, David. I'm serious. And I don't need your permission." Something inside me broke in that moment. The last shred of hope, the last thread of patience. It all unraveled. Without a word, I turned and began packing her belongings. "David, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "I'm done," I said, my tone cold and final. "I'm done with your lies, your betrayal, your excuses. If you want to be with him, then go. But you're not staying here." She begged, pleaded, swore she'd change. But this time I was unmoved. I had spent too long trying to fix something that was irreparably broken. By the time I finished packing her things and set them by the door, she was in tears. "David, please," she whispered. "Don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll make it right." But it was too late. "You already had your chance," I said, opening the door, "and you threw it away." With that, I closed the door on the life we had built together, knowing there was no going back. The door closed with a definitive click, and the weight of what had just transpired pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. For the first time in years, the house was silent. No laughter, no arguments, no muffled conversations in the next room. Just the deafening stillness that came with the realization that this chapter of my life was over. I leaned against the door, my chest tight and my mind racing. What had I just done? Did I really have the strength to let her go, to walk away from everything we'd built together? Or was this a decision I'd come to regret for the rest of my life? Linda's cries on the other side of the door had stopped. I heard her shuffle away, her footsteps fading into the distance. I didn't look out the window to watch her leave. I couldn't bear to see her one last time. I spent that night sitting in the living room, staring at nothing in particular. The memories of our life together flooded my mind. Our wedding day, the vacations we'd taken, the late-night talks about our dreams for the future. For years, she had been my anchor, my partner, my safe place. And yet, here I was, drowning in the aftermath of her betrayal. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, without really living. Friends and family reached out, but I didn't have the energy to explain what had happened. How could I sum up the destruction of my marriage in a few sentences? Linda tried to contact me several times. She sent texts, left voicemails, and even wrote me a letter that arrived in the mail a week later. It was filled with apologies, promises to change, and pleas for one more chance. She swore that she regretted everything, that she realized too late what she had thrown away. I didn't respond. It wasn't because I didn't care. On the contrary, a part of me still loved her. Despite everything, I couldn't just turn off my feelings. But I knew that love wasn't enough. Not anymore. Love couldn't erase the lies, the betrayal, or the damage she had caused. As time passed, I began to pick up the pieces of my life. I started therapy not just to process the pain but to figure out how to move forward. My therapist helped me understand that Linda's choices weren't a reflection of my worth or my effort in the relationship. They were her own decisions, born of her own flaws and insecurities. One day, about 3 months after I'd ended things, I ran into her by chance. It was at a grocery store of all places. She was standing in the produce aisle, staring at a basket of apples, when she turned and saw me. For a moment we both froze. Then, she smiled. A small, tentative smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "David," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the store. "Linda," I replied, nodding. We stood there, awkwardly silent, until she finally spoke again. "You look good. Better than the last time I saw you." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. "Thanks," I said after a pause. "I've been trying to focus on myself." She nodded, her expression a mix of sadness and something that looked like pride. "I'm glad," she said. "You deserve to be happy." There was so much I wanted to say in that moment. Questions I wanted to ask, emotions I wanted to express. But I realized that none of it would change what had happened. What was done was done. "Take care of yourself, Linda," I said, my voice steady. "You too," she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And just like that, we went our separate ways. In the months that followed, I began to feel like myself again. The pain didn't vanish, it never does, but it became manageable. I started reconnecting with friends, trying new hobbies, and even dipping my toes into the dating world. Through it all, I learned an important lesson. Healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning from it, growing stronger, and finding the courage to open yourself up to new possibilities. Linda was a part of my story, and she always would be. But she wasn't the ending. She was just a chapter. One that taught me about love, loss, and the resilience of the human heart. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Life didn't turn out the way I had planned, but maybe that was okay. Maybe, just maybe, the best was still yet to come. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference.